Buenas and Hafaday. This hearing by the Committee on Innovation, Economic, Workforce, and Youth Development is now called to order. It is now 9 a.m. For the record and in accordance with 5 GCA Chapter 8, subsection 8107, public hearing notices were sent on Thursday, April 26th, 2018, adhering to the 5 working day notice, and a second public notice on Wednesday, May 1st, 2018, 48 hours prior to today. In addition, this hearing was noticed on the legislature's website at www.guamlegislature.com. Joining me here this morning is Senator Mary Camacho Torres, and I'd like to thank her for joining me. We have 2 items on this morning's agenda. First, we'll hear the appointment of Mr. Ernesto V. Espaldon Jr. as a member to the GITA Board of Directors, followed by the proposed rules and regulations pursuant to the Administrative Adjudication Law from the Department of Labor Rules at 17 GAR, Chapter 6, Article 1 and 2, or basically the Guam Department of Labor Fair Employment Practice Rules and Regulations. And at this time, I'd like to call the panel of individuals who've signed up to testify. Please come forward and be seated when your name is called. Mr. Ed Camacho from GITA. Mr. Jun Espaldon. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Camacho, yes, if you could just state your name for the record and you can begin.
Okay, my name is Ed Camacho with the Guam Economic Development Authority. I'm here to read written testimony by Administrator Mr. J. Rojas. Buenas Jin Hafaday, Chairman Senator Bisco Lee, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to offer my testimony in favor of Ernesto V. Espaldon Jr. June to continue to serve as a board member for the Guam Economic Development Authority. Director Espaldon has been a vital part of our board since 2014 and has brought a wealth of knowledge and understanding with the local businesses concerned. Director Espaldon has successfully established himself in Guam's business community, having grown several businesses, including as president of Fun Foods International, Quick Service Food, which owns and operates Cold Stone Creamery and Wendy's. Together, these establishments have provided over 200 jobs to the local residents. Wendy's Guam also received recognition as International Franchise of the Year in 2015. It is important to have this representation on our board, as it is GITA's mission to develop and sustain local small business, which are the driving force behind any economy. Since accepting his appointment to GITA's board, June has provided very thoughtful insight into the business community and has demonstrated a very common sense approach to problem solving. He has asked the hard questions and has offered a new and innovative point of view. Through his participation on the board and his personal accomplishments, Director Espaldon has truly proven to be committed to continue the growing the local economy and building a sustainable future for Guam. I ask the committee and members of the 34th Guam Legislature to support this nomination of Mr. Espaldon and vote in his favor. Thank you. Sujus Basi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Camacho. Mr. Espaldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Senator Regine Bisco Lee, and Honorable Senator Torres, member of this distinguished committee. Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Ernesto Verata Espaldon Jr., and I have been nominated to the board of the Guam Economic Development Authority. I am honored and very much humbled at this opportunity to serve our community. I have served 4 years on the GITA board and don't know why I am attempting to sign up for another 4. It might be my way of participating in government, even though I am in the private sector, or maybe just because I enjoy working on these issues. It's probably a combination of the above, but more so tied together by a principle to live and breathe a mantra of service to our fellow men and women. My family has always believed that community service is a part of our calling. There is a community service bone in my body, very much like there is in yours. I think you understand. I view this renomination to the Gita Board as a privilege to further serve in a way which is complementary to my professional experience, my talent, and my interest. I look forward to contributing and being part of a team charged to preserve and promote Guam through commerce, create economic opportunities, and positively impact the quality of life of our people. I've always believed that as much as it is our charge to provide guidance and leadership for Gita's mission and the government's economic development affairs, we must be an agency and board that continues to learn, to be open to change, and a board that improves in our execution for this community that we love and serve. My family and I are grateful for this opportunity to serve, and I thank you for your kind consideration.
Thank you very much. Senator Torres, do you have any questions for Mr. Espaldon?
Good morning, Mr. Espaldon. June, as I know you. Thank you for agreeing to serve another 4 terms. I think at this time we really have a lot of concerns about Gita and where Gita has come. Clearly the Gita, when it was initialized, was done at a time where Guam was in its infancy in economic development. And through the vision of great statesmen and our forefathers like Frank Paris, my uncle, he understood what was needed, some of the incentives that was needed to attract investors into Guam. But we also have been seeing of late some concern that perhaps Gita has not served the island in the way that it was initially intended, insofar as a lot of the expenditures, a lot of the fees that are allotted to it and that are expended by it. I'm very impressed with your second to the last statement, where you believe that the agency must continue to learn, be open to change, and improve in the execution. There haven't been all that favorable news bites about travel expenses. And you know, those are things that clearly when you think about an agency that has a wealth of resources, you would expect that those resources are invested in areas that have a direct impact. And sometimes the decisions made by the board with regard to travel and attending certain things, it can be questioned whether that's the most prudent use of resources, especially at a time where we are looking for greater economic development or stability in the government. But what I want to ask you, though, is as a businessman who's developed projects on Guam, what do you see Gita's role in construction projects at the moment? Because I understand that they have had more involvement in construction projects. Do you see that as a reasonable use of Gita as an agency in the government?
Probably not. You know, I believe that well, let me take that back there. You know, if it is construction regarding government of Guam properties, yes, we do have a role to play in that. In terms of whether or not we have all the internal resources and expertise to completely execute it through, that might not necessarily be the case.
I'm glad to hear that, because we have a bill most recently passed, hasn't been signed into law, with regard to Simon Sanchez, and I believe Gita is part of that. And that's what some of us have some concern about, is when you look at projects with a great deal of money, you would expect that the expertise is properly placed. And I would hope that when you continue in the board, that you know the direction of Gita in that regard should be, if you're clearly open to change and how Gita can best serve the community, we might need to reconsider how we've now gone off to another direction. Because Simon Sanchez is one. I know the museum was one recent, and I think in another case there was talk about the flood mitigation project in Tumon, GITA having a role in that. And so that is one area that I and others in the community have expressed to me, needs to be considered or reconsidered. But I certainly hope that as a businessman I trust that as a businessman you know how important it is to continue the economic vision that was started when GITA was incepted, and how, without things being in place and prudency being committed by the board, that, we're not going to advance, and that we're only going to have more questions about why we do things and why we spend money the way that we do, and whether our return on the investments are accurate. But I've preached more than I've asked a question, but I just wanted to make those points because I see that you're one person that perhaps can sympathize with that point of view and maybe take it home as a member of the board of GITA. But I certainly support your nomination, your renomination, and if you have a comment on some of my comments, I would. I
just want to thank you for your comments and for bringing those specific situations up, and also your guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. And I also want to take this opportunity, Mr. Aswaran, to thank you not just for your service in the past 4 years to the GITA board and to this island, but for also accepting the governor's nomination now, as well as taking time from your busy schedule to meet with me prior to this confirmation hearing and answer some of the questions that I've had. This is a question that I ask every single person that comes before us to be confirmed, and some of the challenges that we hear from other boards and commissions is that they have trouble meeting quorum, and that they're not able to do the work that they're supposed to be doing because meetings aren't attended by all these members of the boards and commissions. And so I just want to start by asking you if you think you'll have any issues attending board meetings, and have you had any problems in the past attending board meetings?
Right. In the past, no, I have not had problems. I've attended a majority of the board meetings throughout the years. And going into the future, I don't foresee any problems being able to attend future meetings. And when it comes to quorum, we've done a pretty good job at being able to meet. Sometimes it's a little difficult to get our schedules together, but we seem to get it done, and frankly, we've been meeting very regularly, almost every month over the past number of years.
Thank you very much. And yeah, every board meeting that I've attended, you've been there, and I very much appreciate your feedback and your input during those meetings and some of the questions that you raise. On that note, I wanted to ask you, and this is something that I asked you when we met, is what do you think is GITA's primary challenge? Being on the board for the past 4 years, you're very intimately involved and aware of what's been presented to the board as some of the things that you've had to make decisions about. So I wanted to ask you what you think their primary challenges are and how we can help to remedy that.
I think that on a macro level, it's really spurring economic activity. Over the past 4 years, I have seen really the intent of the board and the management to try and drum up additional activity and jobs and investments for the island, and it remains a challenge. Some of it might be environmental and external, something that we can't control, whether it be competition from other places or federal government regulation as it comes to the visas. However, also some of it might be internal, and what we need to do is we need to take a look at the items that we do have control over, the internal items, and make sure that we're improving and we're executing properly.
Thank you. What we also discussed is that we're doing things a little bit differently this year in terms of our budgeting process. Mm-hmm. And so GITA hasn't really in the past had to come before this body and defend their budget being autonomous. So since we have our budget hearing scheduled for this Friday, I wanted to ask you what you think the legislature should be scrutinizing. I know my colleague raised issues about travel and different things like that, and some of the response that we've heard in the media and from GITA representatives is that it doesn't necessarily come from the general fund, so we shouldn't be as worried about it. But I'm of the mind that with a lot of these bonds, the taxpayers of Guam are the ones that end up footing the bill in the end, with a lot of these fees and different things tacked onto it. So I wanted to ask you if there's anything in particular in the GITA budget that you think we need to take a closer look at.
Sure. I think first of all, when you take a look at the GITA budget, you'd like to take a look at forecasted revenue. You want to understand where those revenues are coming in from and what percentage of GITA's overall revenues come from those different sources. You also want to test the validity of that revenue forecast. Is it over forecasting, under forecasting? Because a lot of times that sets the expense level. So we need to develop a reasonable and realistic forecast for revenue. At the same time, though we all can't see into the future, there might be some ability to look at the timing of these revenues and to make sure that GITA is keeping track of when these revenues are coming in and comparing them to expenses. The second thing I would look up are salaries and benefits. And I only say that because it's the largest part of the expense. Now that may be similar to many other agencies, but just because it is, over 3/4 of the expense, it's prudent to actually review the salaries and benefits. I would look at office lease space. When we try and take a look at opportunity, I would compare it to other government agencies and find out what they're doing and how they're doing, and seeing whether or not we have opportunity for savings there. Back to the revenue side, I would take a look at the leases that we manage and really take a look at the income being brought in and seeing whether you could have somebody analyze if these leases were where they should be, what type of income could that produce, and then trying to help as a legislative body as to ways to get us into that position of more, I think, fair leases for the government. I would look at travel expenses. I think it's, it is definitely prudent. It's very important that we manage those funds wisely. I think everybody at GITA could tell you that the board, and frankly, I thank the media for providing a different angle. And when I took a look at our budget, it's not squarely on the budget because it is not part of the operating budget of GITA. And the travel expenses are pass-through expenses that get charged to the bond fees. Having said that, we also don't know whether or not we might be able to accomplish the same results spending less. And I think that that's something that we should all be open-minded to. As you take a look at the budget and as you think about it in the next couple months too, I would also just try and understand the business model of GITA. Where the revenues come from, since there is no appropriation for GITA, and realizing the work and the work that gets put into the different tasks that are carried out by GITA. And should we decide to alter that business model, whether it be dealing with the bond fees or the community contributions, GITA needs your assistance in trying to understand how we would evolve that business model. And finally, last but not least, to be fair to GITA, I think it's also important to take a look at the actual audits of GITA over the past number of years and see how they've done and see whether or not there was anything we needed to learn upon, or has GITA been doing a fair and honest and good job in terms of reporting their numbers and keeping their books. That's what I would look at in the budget. There's a lot of other little things, but so we don't dilute the main issues, I would look at those items.
Thank you very much, Mr. Espaldon. And you had mentioned looking into office space, and that was something that I think many members of previous bodies have been very critical of. Rent costs, and the public in general have been critical of the government of Guam in trying to get our costs down for renting office space. And I want to thank GITA, I want to thank the board for providing a resolution recently to purchase a building nearby and considering that potentially as a use for GITA's office space. So that's something that the committee is considering. I also want to take the opportunity to really thank the GITA employees. I know you work very closely with a lot of them, and you've been kind of the person on the board that's been very cautious and scrutinizing their budget and asking a lot of questions. And so I really appreciate that, and I want to ask you to continue to do that and to provide that kind of oversight from the board's level. We recently had requested an audit by the OPA to look into the qualifying certificate program, and so I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe comment about that and maybe provide for the committee what you think should be kind of scrutinized in this audit.
And it somewhat ties into the budget because, first of all, I think the good news is that the breakdown of the revenues that you can attribute to the qualifying certificates is actually clearly outlined in supplemental budget documents. So you can be rest assured that all of that is face in front of everybody. At the same time, the compliance division also provides a monthly board report. And so we're able to see funds that have come in and where they have been allocated. I think areas to brainstorm as it comes to the qualifying certificate is, again, the community contributions. And the idea is that maybe when you discuss with GITA management, trying to understand how the decisions are made as to what percentage of what funds is going to go towards whatever the qualifying certificate holder had asked for and how much is retained by GITA. Again, please remember that a portion of these funds are used as part of the operating budget. And so I think understanding that decision-making process, I think we may have the opportunity to also make it better and also all be more aware of it. And again, what I stress is that if there are changes, if we are collectively thinking of changes as to how community contributions are divided, we need your assistance in letting us know how GITA moves forward should that business model change.
Thank you. And my final question to you is, there have been members of the board that have called into question and in a way described GITA's funding model as kind of a perverse, that has perverse incentives. What are your thoughts about the way that GITA is funded and if we should look at making changes on that?
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to, but at the same time, I'm also, as I also mentioned, I may have mentioned that I'm just sensitive to government operations as well, and but yes, the answer is, in an ideal situation, the way how it is funded changes, and that it is a more stable source of funds. What happens if we don't go out for bonds as often? What happens if we don't get investors or qualifying certificates? So it is unstable from that standpoint. And we would hope that the legislature and the administration could provide assistance in providing GITA a more stable funding source.
Well, I certainly want to thank you, Mr. Espaldon, and thank you, Mr. Camacho, for being here this morning. I do want to note for the public that Friday, May 11th, is 8 calendar days after our public hearing, and we'll continue to accept written testimony on this nomination until then. But again, I want to thank you for answering the governor's call and your commitment to continue to serve the people of Guam in this capacity. So thank you very much. Sizos Masi.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lee, and thank you, Senator Torres.
We'll continue on to the next portion of our agenda. The Department of Labor Fair Employment Practice Rules and Regs. And we have a number of folks who've signed in. I'm not sure if all of these people wish to testify, but I'll call the first panel of individuals. And if you'd like to, please join us at the table. Charlotte Huntsman with SHRM. John Ray Uggan. Jeff Sablon, Guam Department of Labor. Rose Morales with SHRM. Senator Sam Mabini, Department of Labor. Greg Massey, Department of Labor. Scott Anderson, Department of Labor. Margaret Cruz, DOE. Oh, no, okay. Sorry, I just want to note, Margaret Cruz, Ramon Lazama, and Dana Gutierrez have also signed in, but don't wish to provide oral or written testimony at this time. Dr. Mabini, you can begin.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Senator Torres. Thank you for the opportunity for us to come here this morning to present the proposed rules and regs pursuant to the administrative adjudication law for DOL's, Guam DOL's rule at 17 GAR, Chapter 6, Article 1 and 2. We know that these rules and regulations are critical in order to carry out the Fair Chances Hiring Process Act. So we look forward to hopefully have it finalized today. We did submit on April 25th the completed prerequisites for rulemaking, and it did undergo the Attorney General's review as well as the Governor's Office approval. And we did review it again one more time in preparation for today. We recognize that we have passed the required deadline in order to get this going. So that's why I hope that today we'd be able to finalize today's rules and regs so that we can move forward. I just wanted to also clarify that I had the help of not only our division heads, like Mr. Jeff Sablon of the Fair Employment Practice Division, as well as, and I'm thankful to have Greg Massey and Scott Anderson, who's from another division, who have had extensive experience in the development of GARs. So they have been very instrumental. So they are here today to also answer any follow-up questions as we move forward to finalizing and moving forward the proposed rules and regs. Thank you.
Mr. Massey?
Good morning, Senators. I don't have anything real formal to add other than what Sam said, but we have put quite a bit of work into it. I know that the deadline to have rules and regs out I think it expired in February, and we've done the best we could with the resources we've had to really put all the fine details into getting this done, and we hope to get it passed out, quickly so we can really implement and start doing the education campaign with employers, through SHRM and Employers Council and those other organizations. That's all I have, and we're available to answer questions.
Yes, good morning, Senator. Same goes with me. I'm sharing the same sentiments with what Dr. Mabini and Greg has mentioned, we have put a long hours in terms of putting this rulemaking in, and also, you know, we're here to listen to what the other employers have to say to us as part of their consideration in terms of what we have in place. But other than that, you know, we're here to present the final draft with you guys, and hopefully we can move forward and start the process with the employers and also the you know, employees out there and applicants as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Anderson?
Morning, Senators. I don't have anything to add. We're just here to answer questions if need be.
And I'll now turn the floor over to Senator Torres if she has any questions for the panel.
I want to begin by thanking you very much for your efforts and your contribution throughout this entire process, not only in developing the legislation with me and others as a major stakeholder, but also in your efforts with regard to promulgating rules and regs. I want to note that the Fair Chances Hiring Practice Act, under 6104 administrative responsibilities, the task of Guam Department of Labor is to develop administrative rules and regs in accordance with outlining procedures by which it will accept, investigate, and adjudicate complaints of this act and the enforcement provisions of this act. And in reviewing the final draft that you submitted, I believe that you accomplished all four aspects of what was required of you. But I did, in going through it, I did have a few things that I wanted to just clarify from you. On the section 6202 of your draft, Fair Chances Hiring Practice, you open up with sub-item A, indicating that an employer shall not request or require a court clearance. I just wanted to note that we're missing the word a police clearance from there, and we should probably interject that as well. But I wanted to ask you, Director Mabini, you indicated that a request for a police clearance from an applicant cannot be requested until a conditional offer of employment is made. But what wasn't here was the other vital component of the act, which, if you look at what the act calls for, in addition to not asking for a police and court clearance, there's also under 6102C of the bill a requirement that an employer shall not also make inquiry about the disclosure of arrest records or criminal cases that didn't result in stuff. So I was wondering if that was a notation that also needed to be included in here. Are you following me, 6102? Yeah. Of your rules and regs, it's section 6202. But what I'm referring to is the section in the law, which is under general policy. And that section in the law is 6101. So 6101 of the law has subparts A, which includes police and court clearances, and then so your rules and regs, I'm at 6202. So to begin with, I think we're missing the word a police clearance from that sentence.
I'm sorry, Senator, which sentence are you referring to?
A, the opening sentence of section 6202. It's called Fair Chances Hiring Process, and it says an employer shall not request or require a court clearance from an applicant prior. And what I'm pointing out is we should also put police there. But then I also want to note that one of the things that's prohibited by this act, in addition to asking for the clearances, is just making a general inquiry about or disclosure about arrest records or criminal cases that were dismissed or expunged. So I would recommend that we add that other component of it, just to be consistent with the statute.
Senator, if I may, we should have put in police clearance, but it's also covered under the statute, so it wouldn't mean that it not being in the rule doesn't mean that the prohibition is gone.
That's correct. And I think when I was looking at the testimony at the AAA process, one of the concerns was we don't, and we understand that rules and regs aren't we don't require that the statute be duplicated in rules and regs, and that's why I mentioned in the beginning that you're really just setting the process for how do you receive complaints, how do you investigate them, and how do you adjudicate them. But I know that there was also a concern by some of the people that testified that it would be helpful, if there was some brief reference so that a person who's referencing a rules and regs doesn't have to keep going back to statute to understand. So
yeah, that was an omission. I think further on it does mention police and court clearance. So it was just something maybe we had, didn't catch when we had. That was an issue that was brought up before. On one of our first drafts, it had just court clearances in, and then we went and inserted police clearance in further on.
And I noticed that you did, but I'm pointing out that in this case, I might just make that technical correction where we just complete it, because it's only half complete in that particular sentence. And I would also suggest that we also, just to be complete, since you've already made reference, either that or we delete it. We delete the sentence or we complete the prohibitions there. So my recommendation is if it's a desire to have that sentence in there, I just correct it by putting police clearance. And then I also add another sentence saying that an employer shall not make an inquiry about or require disclosure of an applicant's arrest record or criminal cases that didn't result in a conviction.
I guess, Senator, I have a question. Are we allowed to make changes at this point?
I think if there are technical changes, and that's what I'll clarify, because I see this as a technical change. It's almost like
it's just like a typo.
Completing, it's almost completing a sentiment. And because I don't believe that if we were to make grammatical changes or so, that would constitute us having to go through a bill process.
Right.
Because I'm not altering anything about the rules and regs that you're setting forth insofar as how do you get complaints, how do you do this. These are just what I consider technical corrections. And I'll clarify that if I'm in error, then clearly I'll take another step. But I don't desire
if we can make
to
changes,
belabor.
yeah, we would love to. We would do that.
Yeah, I don't desire to belabor the process because I think you've accomplished what your requirement was under the statute. But when you have rules and regs, I mean, of course you want to, if there's a technical thing or a typo, we want to.
And thank you, Senator, for pointing that out. And like you had mentioned and Greg had mentioned, further down the letter B was where it's actually even outlined and clarified, which is on page 13, our version, where an employer may not make reference to any requirements for police and/or court clearance in a general advertisement, job posting, interview, etc. Mm-hmm. So that's where that's clearly outlined, as far as I understand. But we could make that, if it could be just a technical correction, then letter A, yes, we could do that.
Sorry, Dr. Sam, you're referring to page 13C? B.
Right above section 6203.
Thank you.
Is that one right?
Okay. And then I just want to ask, with regard to the timing for submitting, requesting information, you established days like 15 calendar days under investigations, for example, 62022. Those days were not, timelines were not objected by anyone, right? That's deemed to be a reasonable timeline?
We're talking about I'm kind of lost. Where were we at?
When you're asking an employer for information.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different timelines. Yeah, that's kind of pretty standard. You know.
Yeah, it's standard.
We didn't have anyone object to it, as far as I remember.
Okay, the only other question I had was on 6203 signage posting. There's, is this, what exactly is the content of this posting, the signage posting? It just was unclear to me, and I'm not disagreeing with it, I'm just asking for clarification. Under 6203?
This was envisioned to be kind of the educational piece to advise everyone. You know, there's a lot of different labor posters, like we have them for wage and hour. We have, on the federal side, we have EEOC posters. And so what we the intention was to try to kind of consolidate some of those, include fair chances along with other labor laws, and kind of have something with this, but also to include, you know, other local stuff. Jeff, you want to speak on that?
Okay.
Yeah, basically the signage posting would just give I guess the employee or the applicant information in regards to the fair chance, knowledge of what the fair chance requirements are, and knowledge of what the employer requirements are. And it's pretty much a summary of what the you know, the act or the law is all about. And what we've looked into also is a bundle poster for Guam labor laws as well, that we're looking at down the road to incorporate not only the mandates that we have here locally, but also mandates with the federal side as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I also noted that you made all the, you included a lot of the feedback from the public in your things, because I noticed in your red line version that there was a lot of additions, which I thought was very, very receptive of you and very accommodating. But the one thing too that I saw, and just this is along the same vein of when you start mention of something, but it leaves off the whole picture. I found the same sort of situation in section 6205 under penalties. If you go to number 5 references a monetary cap for fines, but it only references a certain category of employer, which is the category that has up to 16 to up to 30 employees. And my question is, in that situation, because you've made mention of one, would it also be advisable to complete it and make mention of the other categories of employees, which is the 31 to 99 and the 100 plus, because those also have staggered fee caps?
Yeah, Senator, the reason this is in is this is actually a kind of a technical correction between, if in the statute, the definition of employer and the caps for the penalties, they kind of don't sync up. There's like a question. In the statute, it says an employer is, excuse me one moment.
And you're looking at 6104B of the statute, right?
So the definition of employer under the statute says an employer is a person, company, blah, 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 who employs more than 15 employees. And then when you look at the monetary caps under B1, it says for employers that employ 15 to 30. So in essence, the definition of employer is really 16.
Yes.
Yeah, so what we did was, and that was brought up during a comments period, so we specifically put in this clarifying rule to address an employer who, you know, has, to make it more consistent with the definition.
Very good catch. Yes, I see your point. But you could, yeah, I see your point. So whether you do or not perhaps doesn't matter. It's just that there's a reference to it here and a cap, and then there's, different tiers of there's an escalating fine per violation with each. So, yeah, I can see it. I can see your point in doing that.
Yeah, that was this was actually added in as a result of some comments, and that it was just something we put in to clarify rather than going back and trying to amend the bill or amend the law. Yeah.
Right. No, that makes sense, and that it's interesting. I never saw that, and I've read this how many times?
We didn't see it either until someone brought it up to us.
Okay. All right. Other than that, I didn't have any concerns. What I believe we can do is, I don't think that any of the there's one part where I would have italicized a portion in the definition just to be consistent with the statute, where it talks about the portion where it talks about the. Let me see. I lost my place here. Well, there's one area that needed to be italicized, but that's another one of those technical errors. So I want to just thank you for all your efforts. I do want to work towards having the rules and regs enacted into law, because I know that we've been looking at a timeline of February was when this bill took effect, 210 days after it was signed, and I understand the concern out there. Everybody wants to know what the rules and regs, because there's already the law is in place. And so I'll do my best to make what I believe are minor technical corrections to the final draft, and I don't think we should have any issue going forward. But I'll work as expediently as I can. And I want to thank you again, and I want to thank the representatives from SHRM who are here. I saw your imprint throughout in reading the AAA documents from the hearings that they had. I saw your imprint in there, so I appreciate also your careful review of this and your input. And
Senator, if I may, we are working closely with SHRM, and this is a new process. I mean, this has never been done before, so there's no previous history for us to rely on. So I'm pretty sure that the department will circle back in maybe about a year after we've had some live test cases, and then do an update, because I'm sure we're going to have some lessons learned. So this would be our first stab at it. SHRM has made us aware of some kind of real, technical or some things that it might need some more clarification, and we're committed to working with them and maybe coming back in 12 months and doing an update. Go through the whole process again.
And I appreciate that. And I think one of the most critical things, too, is the outreach and education, because a lot of people don't understand who this applies to. And there might be some small business owners out there who are worried that they may be in violation. So I think first and foremost that public education needs to occur, where they understand, the simple concept of what the fair chances hiring practice is. And then the second thing too is that people need to understand that Department of Labor is the agency that is administering this and enforcing it. So all inquiries should probably first go to Department of Labor, and if they don't understand, the law, then the interpretation of the law could perhaps be best provided by a person who's licensed to give legal advice. So that would be the first step, I think, is who does this apply to? What is the simple concept? And who do you go for further information? But thank you again, and I'll certainly look forward to seeing this, because I know that one of the requirements too of the statute is that any violations of this, the noticing, if it doesn't really take effect until a year after this is enacted. So it's not like there isn't a learning curve and an opportunity for people to be cautioned and counseled into compliance. So I don't think the intent was ever to seek violators. It was just to get people accustomed to the concept and provide for ample time for education, training, and counseling if there were, minor infractions committed.
Yes, and thank you, Senators. And Madam Chair, I wanted to share that, again, I want to thank my team, but also the input from the private sector. They are an important stakeholder, and I will share that since the inception of the Act, that I have spoken to many employers as well as leaders like organizations like SHRM, who've really expressed their understanding of the importance and the intent of the law. And it is their interest in just making sure that employers, especially the small ones who are unsure of how to navigate these waters, how do we help guide them? And Jeff has been very instrumental in being able to develop these kind of informational guidance in the interim. So I wanted to recognize him as well, and of course Greg and his team for helping us sift through the technical aspects of developing a GAR, and we look forward to maybe some future GARs for the for the department. Again, thank you for the support.
And I think one of the things that we're going to realize, one of the immediate benefits of this is it's going to be economically more feasible for people to make applications for employment because they don't have to pay for fees for court clearances up front. So that would be the first advantage to the community. The second advantage is that this bill also, this law now clarifies what information is allowed or is not allowed to be disclosed on police clearances and court clearances. So, a lot of what dogged people because it was an indication of a case that was, dismissed or was never convicted remains on a record and haunts them. And so what this bill does is it also clarifies exactly what information is allowed to go on, so that if you were arrested and there was a case that was lodged against you, but the case was dismissed, then that record of that case doesn't stay on your court record. So those are, I think that those were first steps for helping people who've made mistakes and paid their dues kind of get back on their feet. But mostly, I think initially it helps a little bit when someone wants to put in 2 or 3 applications for a job. And sometimes they're very low-paying jobs, and when you have to pay $25 for an application, that's a lot to ask for someone who doesn't have, much money. But thank you very much, and I look forward to also supporting your efforts and invite you and SHRM and all the stakeholders to continue to keep open dialogue with our offices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Torres. I also want to take the opportunity to thank our stakeholders who are here and those who have participated in this process. As we move through the Fair Employment Practice Rules and Regs, I know that many stakeholders have had input, and I share Senator Torres's concern that we really need to continue to educate the public and continue to have this public discourse. My fear is that there are members of our community, members of the business community that aren't SHRM members, and those are the ones that sometimes, we have the most trouble with, and we invite them to communicate with our partners at DOL and get information about this bill that has now become public law, and just make sure that they're following the rules. But also, we need to remember the genesis of this and the reason why the sponsor has put this bill forward, and we want to make sure that we give everybody in our community a second chance and an opportunity to have a meaningful participation in the legal economy, and we want to encourage that and try to decrease recidivism. I definitely want to thank Department of Labor for being open to feedback and being open to maybe making changes after we have some real live test cases, as you put it, Mr. Massey. So thank you very much. You're good. With that, Sidus Masi, Todas Hamdu, Podifanaten Mizu Pagu, the Committee on Innovation, Economic Workforce, and Youth Development has duly heard both the appointment of Ernesto V. Espaldon Jr. and the Guam Department of Labor Fair Employment Practice Rules and Regulations. Written testimonies may continue to be submitted to our office by emailing Senator Bisco Lee at guamlegislature.org, or you can hand deliver it to us at 163 Chalan Sancho Papa here in Hagåtña until close of business on Friday, May 11th, 2018. This hearing is now adjourned. The time is 9:58 a.m. Sizos Masi.